everybody, and welcome back to a new video on my channel. Today I'm going to be wrapping up and going through all of the books that I read in 2022 and talking a little bit about some of the books that I want to read in 2023. I am a big reader, but I'm not somebody who reads like 100 books a year. I read like 21 books last year. When I was younger, I used to go through books like doing the 100 books a year, but I don't exactly have as much time as I used to for that. So I'm going to go through the 21 books that I read this year and tell you a little bit about them. The first book that I read this year was Robert Jordan, The Eye of the World. This is the first book in the Wheel of Time series, and it is a hefty book, and the font, it's not small. I don't know if that's focusing. It took me a while to get through this book, but I really liked it. I'm big into the fantasy world. It gave me like Lord of the Rings type vibes. And I've only read the first one, but I definitely want to read more of the series this year. And I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood, and I read this when I was in quarantine and had COVID in the beginning of the year in January. It was just a nice, easy read, and I thought that the characters were lovable. It was a little weird at times to know that I was reading like a fan fiction for, what's his name? Kylo Ren. I cannot think of that man's name. Who plays Kylo? Adam Driver. So I was picturing Adam Driver for the main character for the whole book, which is fine, but I just didn't think he fit the scenery. Like, I would have pictured him differently if I didn't know that that was who it was based on. Okay, and I give it 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Circe by Madeline Miller. This one took me a little bit longer to get through. So I read The Eye of the World like over my winter break, and then I read The Love Hypothesis, like I said, whenever I was in quarantine. And so I finished Love Hypothesis, and then I picked this one up to read, and I started it while I was in quarantine, but then I didn't read it again for a couple months. So this one, I was in a bit of a slump when I read it, but I still thought it was a really good book. I loved The Song of Achilles, which is why I picked this one up in the first place. And I thought that it was really good. I think it was really well written. It wasn't my favorite book ever, but it was good. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I'm really not harsh when I give my ratings. Most of my books are 4-star reads. The next book that I read was Beach Read by Emily Henry. I borrowed this book from my roommate and I absolutely loved it. It was so cute, and it was my first time reading an Emily Henry book, and it was just a great introduction, and now I'm obsessed with her. So I gave that one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was My Contrary Mary, which is by Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton, and Jody Meadows. This is, I believe, a middle school grade read, and it's really funny. As you see here, I've read 2 of their other books, which is My Lady Jane and My Plain Jane, and they're all plays on different things in history or different different characters from books. I think My Plain Jane was about Jane Eyre, and My Lady Jane was about this girl Jane who was supposed to become queen after Queen Elizabeth, and she was beheaded and all of these things. So it's really, really good. This is about Mary Queen of Scots, which I really enjoyed because I was really into watching the TV show Reign earlier in the year too, so that fit in very well with that. But they definitely take a lot of twists and turns and magic, and I have to say I didn't love this one as much as I thought I was going to. Honestly, the My Lady Jane, which is the first one, was my absolute favorite, and I loved it, and I think just the time when I read it and everything was just, it lined up perfectly, and I really, really enjoyed it. But it was still really funny and entertaining, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was actually my favorite book that I read this year, and that was Lore by Alexandra Bracken. This book, I could not put this book down, which is just a mark of a good book to me. I read it all in one sitting while we were driving to Florida, and I just really, really, really enjoyed it. I think that the world building was really good. I think that the plot was really, really interesting, and I love books that are set with Greek mythology as the background, but I thought that this was a really interesting take on the Greek mythology, a little bit different than what I have read in the past, so I would definitely recommend this book. Okay, now we're getting into my little bit of a romance kick that I had during the summer. The next book that I read this on a cruise. It was The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas, and I really did like this book. I'm usually not a huge romance, but well, I can't say that. Reading adult romance or new adult romance, whatever this is pretty new to me, but I do really like it. I thought this was a really cute story. It was fake dating trope. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I felt like some of the writing was a little bit too cheesy for me, but I still liked it. It was cute. Next, I read People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. Like I said, I loved Emily Henry this year, and I read this while I was on vacation. I was sat in Disney Springs reading this for hours, and it was just really, really cute. I thought that this one was probably my least favorite of her books that I read this year. It's a little bit slower, and I didn't like the way that the time switched all the time. Like, it was really cool, but it basically goes back and forth, like back in time whenever these two people first met, and then like to the present day. And sometimes I was just like, it felt a little bit drawn out, but I still really liked it, and it was cute. It just took me a while to get through. I still gave that one 4 out of 5 stars though, because I love Emily Henry. The next book that I read was actually an audiobook, and I read it like kind of at the same time that I was reading some of these other books, and that was The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. I love the Da Vinci Code movie, and so I finally decided this year I wanted to read a bunch of Dan Brown's books, and they do not disappoint. I just love the mystery combined with like the conspiracy and the history. It's all just so fascinating to me, and so I really, really enjoyed listening to that book. I gave that 4 out of 5 stars. A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. I have been a Sarah J. Maas fan now for a couple of years. I read ACOTAR, I read, which is this series, I read the Throne of Glass series, really liked them both. This one was one of my lesser favorites. It felt a little bit like the plot was lost in the romance, which is fine because the romance is a huge part of the plot of the book, and it should be, and that's what I picked up, and I should know that. But for me, I usually just prefer a little bit more action, which is why I liked most of the ACOTAR series. And this one definitely did have action, don't get me wrong. It just felt like it was diminished a little bit. Like, it didn't feel like the action in it had to happen. It was like, oh yeah, I can't just write straight spice. I need something to happen. Maybe that's an unpopular opinion, but that's just kind of how I felt about this one in particular. I still gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed reading it. It was good. The writing, I think, has gotten a lot better for her. Like, the start of some of these books of hers are sometimes a little bit immature to read, but I mean, not the content, just like the way that she writes, but I think it's gotten really nuanced now, and I like that. I also like the topics that were covered in this one. It was a very different perspective because it was from a different character's point of view, which I also liked. The next book that I read was Fable by Adrienne Young, and I really, really liked this book. I saw it, I had like eyed it in the bookstore a few times, and then I finally picked it up and started reading it. And I just loved the pirate vibes in the summer, especially whenever I was reading this. It was just perfect. I sat on the beach and I read this, and I just really enjoyed it. I thought that it was well written. It's definitely a YA book, but it was good. I liked the romance in it. It's like a subplot. It was cute. And yeah, I'm very much into this series now. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next was another 5-star read, and that was this book. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I just thought this book was so nuanced and interesting, and the way that the story was told was just so well done. I could not get over it. I definitely want to read more Taylor Jenkins Reid in the following year because I really, really like this book. I think this is considered literary fiction, and I think that that's something that I want to read more of in general. I definitely felt like this was a book that was a bit more outside of my comfort zone, and it blew me away, and I really, really enjoyed it. So, I mean, obviously it's like a viral book, so if you haven't read it, I'm be surprised, but if you haven't read it and it's on your TBR, you should definitely read it. The next book that I read was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I love this book. I thought it was really, really good. I like that the main character is like the intense lady from the, like if you're thinking of like a Hallmark movie, like she'd be like the intense like workaholic type one. And I don't know, maybe I just relate to her because that's kind of how I am, but I like that she stayed true to herself throughout the book, but there was still character development, like don't get me wrong, and I just thought they were really sweet. This was a good book. Any book that's about people who like books is gonna be good. I gave that one 4 out of 5 stars. So now I went on a little bit of a binge read and I read the Heartstopper series. It was so good. These are all graphic novels. I'm sure you've heard of them. There's a TV show on Netflix. I bought the first one and I was like, oh, I'll read it really quickly. Like, I've never really read graphic novels before, so obviously I read this like in like an hour and a half and I was like, oh, I need more. So then I read the rest of them. I literally went to Barnes & Noble and bought all 4 volumes. And I just thought that they were really sweet, but also they like really cover some rather deep topics. And the way that it does so, I think is really, really good. I think it's sweet and it's like, comes from a place of love. And I just think it was just really, really well done. And they were so cute. Volume 1, I gave 4 out of 5 stars. Honestly, I think that's what I did for all of them. Yeah, Volume 2, I gave 4 out of 5 stars. Volume 3, I gave 4 out of 5 stars. And Volume 4, I actually gave 5 out of 5 stars. And that is because a lot of those things I was talking about mainly happened in this one. And by the time I was done with this series, I was like over the moon. I was so happy. Like these books just gave me so much hug and joy and oh, it was so good. Pretty sure I read all of those in like an afternoon. The next book that I read was The Cartographers by Peng Shepherd. This was definitely a book that was outside of my comfort zone, but one of my friends recommended it to me and then lent me the book. I really enjoyed this book. It was magical, but like set in the real world, so it's like kind of magical realism, is that a thing? And it was just so many twists and turns, so many things that I didn't really see coming, and some things I definitely did see coming, I will not lie, but I just thought it was really well done, and like I said, a bit out of my comfort zone, but I did really enjoy it. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I read that like right towards the end of the summer as I was starting to come back to school, and at the same time towards the end of the summer I started listening to another Dan Brown book. I listened to Angels and Demons, and oh my goodness, I adore this book. This book just, the twists, the turns, like I've seen the movie and I was still so shocked by the book because it's a little bit different, and I was just like, there are so many more layers to this that just, like the end of the book I was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. After that I read Namesake by Adrienne Young. This is the sequel to Fable, and I did still really like this. I definitely liked Fable more, but this was still really good. It has some twists and stuff, but it definitely feels like a middle book. I was a little bit like, it's just kind of dragging on, and so I didn't love this. And I also made the mistake of reading it like during the school year, so I didn't have a lot of time to read, so it took me a few months to get through this. And considering how short of a book it is, that's not great because I just kept forgetting what happened. So still really liked it, but I definitely liked the first one more. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. The last book that I read this year was The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. Very interesting book. I've never really read thrillers much more, so I have gone out of my comfort zone a bit this year. I really did find this really interesting to read. Like I said, a little bit different than what I would normally read, but especially once I got into it, I couldn't put it down, and I really just wanted to know exactly what was happening. I did guess the plot twist or whatever, but it was still really good. I definitely would recommend this if you're interested in thrillers, mystery. I read this around October, which is really sad because it is the last book that I read this year, but that's a whole other issue. I gave that one 4 out of 5 stars. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about my book stats before I move on to what I'm hopefully going to read in the coming year. So I read the most in the month of July, which is definitely makes sense. I think I read like, how many books? I read like 5 books that month, which is a whole bunch for me. And that's mostly because I read the Heartstopper series, and like I said, that took me like an afternoon. Apparently I spend the most time with romance genre and also contemporary and young adult, with fantasy and LGBTQIA+ as the lower ones. My average rating apparently was 4.1. Like I said, I'm a very lenient person when it comes to that. I never know what to give. I did read all fiction books this year, which is perfectly fine, but I definitely want to read some non-fiction books next year. I do have a bunch on my shelf that have been sitting there, and so that actually brings me into what I'm going to hopefully be reading in 2023. Now this is very ambitious of me. I'm basically going to show you my TBR for the year, and I have like 10 books-ish, I think. Maybe not 10. I have like 7 books right now that are already, I'm like, need to make sure I read this year. So let's just go through those. First of all, I have These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is a Romeo and Juliet retelling, and I am almost done with it. I did actually start it a while ago, but mostly I've read it over my Christmas break, and hopefully we'll finish it like in the next couple days. Next, I want to read The Assassin's Blade. I didn't read it while I was reading the Throne of Glass series a couple of years ago, and I think it's time that I do. I just have a vendetta against novellas. I hate them. They just bother me for literally no reason at all. I guess I've just never really read ones I really love, so maybe this will be the one. Next, I really want to read Caraval by Stephanie Garber. Actually, a bunch of her books are on my TBR that I really want to read, but obviously this is the books I already own. It's been sitting on my shelf for a while. It's like a circus set fantasy, and I'm really excited. Next, I want to read Saint, which is like an associated novel with the Fable series, and I am very much looking forward to this one. I think it's going to be interesting. My friends actually got this for me for my birthday, so hopefully I enjoy it. So those are all of the fiction books that I want to read, so now I'm going to move on to the nonfiction. Okay, so the first one I want to read, and I'm not planning on reading this necessarily straight through, but I want to start reading and just kind of get into, is Apollo's Angels, which is a history of ballet. For those of you who don't know, I am a ballet dancer. I mean, I just do it like recreationally. I did it really intensely in high school and then decided not to pursue it afterwards, but I still love it very, very much. So I really am curious about this. I think that there's a lot to learn about the history and how it got us to where we are today, and so I'm really looking forward to reading this book. Next, I want to read One Little Spark, which is by Marty Sklar. My dream job is to be an Imagineer at Disney, and so I love reading these books by Imagineers. And so this is Mickey's 10 Commandments and the Road to Imagineering. So I think this will be really interesting to hear his advice and his experience working at Disney, so I'm very excited. Finally, this is a book that I just recently picked up. This is Serenade so the book is Serenade, A Balanchine Story by Tony Bentley. It's another ballet book. It's like a biography, and also obviously about Serenade and about Balanchine. And I just think this is going to be so cool. Like, I've read the back of this cover several times, and she was basically chosen by Balanchine, so she worked directly with him, who, if you're not in the ballet world, he's a pretty big deal. So I'm really excited to read this. I'm like really looking forward to reading this. I think this is going to be pretty soon. Also, this cover is gorgeous. Okay, that wraps up what I read in 2022 and what I'm hopefully going to be reading in 2023. I hope that you guys enjoyed, and if you did, then let me know what books you were wanting to read in the new year.